We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the centre of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 7th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, how much can Trump and Netanyahu achieve at their meeting in Washington? We'll look ahead to the Israeli Prime Minister's visit to the White House. Also ahead, in the next 60 minutes, more drone strikes on Ukraine, this time threatening the Zaporizhia power plant. We'll have the latest. We'll ask why Poland is sending 5,000 troops to help police its borders with Germany and Lithuania. We'll celebrate the designer behind Paris's Métro signs, and will celebrate Brazilian bakeries.
Brazilian bakeries are a place to flirt, to meet friends. There is an intricate sense of conviviality, the chit-chat while you wait for your fresh bread.
And we'll look through the papers too. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Donald Trump has called his former ally Elon Musk a train wreck after Mr. Musk said he was founding a new rival political party called the America Party. Israel has carried out a wave of air attacks on Houthi targets in Yemen, and indirect talks between Israel and Hamas have ended without any breakthrough. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, the Israeli Prime Minister will arguably know his way around the White House by now. Today marks his third visit to see President Donald Trump in the last 6 months. And they have much to talk about today, following the US piling into the Israeli conflict with Iran and a ceasefire not yet achieved in Gaza. It will be an examination of options for the two men. Well, I'm joined now by Simon Marks, Washington reporter and chief correspondent at Feature Story News. Good morning, Simon. Good to have you with us.
Morning, Emma.
Netanyahu goes with a spring in his step. I think before he headed off to Washington, he said, "Our joint mobilisation brought us a great victory over our joint enemy, Iran." He feels as if he's in a good place.
Yeah, I think there's no question that the two men publicly at least will want to demonstrate that this is a victory lap after that joint US-Israeli military action that President Trump insists completely obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities and its nuclear aspirations. According to former diplomats in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu is more clear-eyed than Donald Trump about the reality of the situation on the ground and does think that Iran was able, certainly, to move much of its enriched uranium before that American attack, and also that possibly the American assault, particularly on the Fordo and Natanz facilities, did not do as much damage as the Americans have been claiming. So behind the scenes, there may be a very different conversation between them about Iran than the one that is taking place publicly. But this is certainly going to be an opportunity for the two men to celebrate what they did together in Iran. But you've also always got to be watchful, I think, for the unexpected. Because remember, the last time Benjamin Netanyahu was in Washington in the Oval Office back in April, that was when Donald Trump surprised the Israeli leader by announcing that the United States wanted to have talks with Iran, something that the Israeli leader opposed. And that really put us on the trajectory that led to those military strikes on Iran, first by Israel, then joined by the United States. So, as ever with Donald Trump, we've got to keep an eye out for the unpredictable.
Indeed. I mean, does the United States actually know what it wants with regards to Iran?
Well, President Trump indicated in comments to reporters on Sunday night that he believes that there is a possible deal that can be done between the United States, Israel and Iran. He said, we're working on a lot of things with Israel, and one of the things is probably a permanent deal with Iran. They have to give up all of the things, but you know so well how the attack turned out. He says that according to every Atomic Energy Commission, it was a complete and total obliteration. But again, that's not necessarily reality, nor how the Israelis see things. What we don't know is the level of discussion that is taking place now between the Iranians and the United States, indirect as it will be, given that the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, emerged from hiding within the last couple of days. That may be an indication that Iran is feeling a little bit more confident that the threats, at least to the supreme leader's safety from the Israelis and the Americans, may have dissipated.
And indeed, this ceasefire between Iran and Israel is very, very vulnerable. How much do we think that Donald Trump will try and ensure that there is a de-escalation and that Israel and Iran do not collapse into conflict again?
Well, it seems pretty clear that Donald Trump is very committed now to de-escalation. I think that was unclear a couple of weeks ago. But one of the reasons why is because the president is very eager to try and revive thoughts about getting things that were once unthinkable, like Saudi Arabia, to normalize ties with Israel, like perhaps even Syria to normalize ties with Israel. He wants to get back to that conversation, basically to the broad Abraham Accords conversation. And so any upswing in military conflict between Israel and Iran that might drag the United States into that stands diametrically opposed to the president's desires to try and prod the Abraham process forward. So I think he's pretty committed to that concept of de-escalation now.
Let's move on to the Israeli-Hamas conflict as well. Again, it is a desire, a hope to create some sort of political outcome, some sort of peace. We've seen the talks in Doha fail this last 12 hours. No great surprise there, but a political outcome and peace is arguably not what Benjamin Netanyahu wants.
Well, that's certainly the view of Benjamin Netanyahu's critics. And of course, we've been here before with the United States expressing quiet confidence that there might be the possibility of a deal. President Trump, again, speaking to reporters at Andrews Air Force Base last night, suggesting that we are close to a deal on Gaza. We could have it this week. And he suggested that Hamas was preparing to release some of the hostages that it continues to hold. But this 60-day ceasefire negotiation, and we know some of the terms that have been reported are quite detailed. It's not what Hamas has indicated it wants, which is a full Israeli withdrawal and a complete cessation of hostilities, but it would certainly set the stage over 60 days for hostages, those alive and those dead, to be returned to Israel and for a significant surge in humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. But as ever, with all of these negotiations, it's extraordinarily fragile, very difficult to predict the outcome of it. And how many times have we been, right on the brink of thinking that there was going to be a ceasefire that was finally agreed and then it didn't materialize?
And it begs a wider question when it comes to the relationship between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, which is how long can Benjamin Netanyahu rely on Donald Trump's unconditional support? I mean, we're seeing evidence in the last couple of days of, I think there's a former security contractor for Gaza's new Israel and US aid distribution, saying that they saw colleagues opening fire on Palestinians simply queuing for food. There is so much evidence now that one wonders where the United States' role, which used to be the world's policeman, where that is now.
Well, look, Donald Trump's mind is obviously one that is focused largely on striking deals, particularly of an economic nature, with the country's partners, its allies, and even its competitors. there is no question that there are all sorts of potential consequences for the Israelis and for the Americans, which of course is backing that Gaza Aid Foundation, as a result of those reports regarding the way in which people desperately trying to reach humanitarian assistance distribution points have been treated. Donald Trump's relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu has been at times bumpy. This has not been a binary relationship at all, as we saw back in April when the Israeli Prime Minister was surprised by Donald Trump's announcement on Iran. But they are very much, I think now, after the Iran attack, tied together at the hip, and they are flip sides of the same coin. That presents opportunity, but it also presents for Donald Trump tremendous risk as well, because he can't be entirely certain that his vision for the future of Gaza, which we know is that sort of Trump Gaza, Riviera in the Mediterranean, that his vision of that is shared by his Israeli partner, and it clearly is not shared by the vast majority of Palestinians.
Let's talk about one relationship which has gone very, very sour. Donald Trump and Elon Musk joined at the hip in the campaign, Elon Musk backing Donald Trump to the hilt financially in terms of his support for the Republican presidential candidacy. We now have Donald Trump calling Elon Musk a train wreck and Elon Musk forming an alternative political party. What's been the reaction in Washington to this?
Well, I think nobody is surprised that the spat that began as soon as Elon Musk left the White House has once again reared its head, because both men are so mercurial and quixotic, and very quickly can find their relationship heading south once again. Elon Musk, of course, very irritated by the passage of the big, beautiful bill, Donald Trump's tax and spending legislation that Mr. Musk says is going to create unsustainable levels of public debt in the United States, now launching this America Party that he's positioning to secure support from disaffected Republicans and Democrats alike. Donald Trump said on Sunday night that it's ridiculous to start a third party. We have tremendous success with the Republican Party. The Democrats have lost their way, but the United States is a two-party system, and adding a third party just creates confusion. The Washington view, of course, is that Mr. Musk can start the America Party, which very much is underscored by images of him in all of the party's early stage social media outreach. But whether he personally is able to attract people to follow it, and whether the party can navigate its way around America's political system with the Electoral College that heavily mitigates in favour of the two big parties in any presidential election year, I think is a very open question. I mean, this is going to be an extremely steep climb for Elon Musk. What it does do is demonstrate that he's willing to put his money into politics in the United States, and he's got so much of it that cash could become, under various circumstances that it might be used, troubling for Republican Party candidates particularly, but potentially for some Democrats as well.
Simon Marks, Washington reporter and chief correspondent at Feature Story News in Washington. Thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. You're listening to Monocle Radio. The time in Kyiv is, 9:13 a.m, 7:13 here in London. And a second wave of drone attacks in 3 days targeted Ukraine on Saturday, with more than 300 being launched by Russia. The UN condemned Moscow's attack for disrupting the power supply to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and once again underlining the ongoing risks to nuclear safety. Well, this comes after Ukraine said it recorded the largest number of drones launched by Russia on Friday. To bring us up to date and to give us a bit more of the wider context, I'm delighted to say that Felicity Spector, senior producer for Channel 4 News here in the UK and author of Bread and War, a Ukrainian story of food, bravery and hope, joins me in the studio. Very good morning to you, Felicity.
Good morning.
So could you just outline what happened on Saturday, please?
Yeah, well, it was just yet another one of these huge attacks which target all across Ukraine. And the Russians have started using this big combination of hundreds of drones and also ballistic and cruise missiles at the same time in order to overwhelm Ukraine's air defence capabilities. And it's really destructive, and the tactics are constantly changing. So Ukrainian air defence units, which were these mobile fire, well, they still are mobile fire units, a lot of them which use machine guns and quite low-tech technology to try and shoot down drones. It's very difficult to do that when there's a big swarm of drones coming at once, and when they fly very high and then suddenly dive straight down. It's quite hard to shoot them down. You only have a very small window of opportunity. So that's why you see some, more of them getting through the air defences. And added to that, the Americans withholding this very crucial delivery of weapons, which were some of them practically on the border with Ukraine at the time. All of that is just complicating matters.
And this particular targeting of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, or the power supply to the power plant, is something which is, again, it just seems to be it is a deliberate and very destructive approach.
Yes, I mean, this whole, the nuclear agency doesn't seem to be able to do very much about it. At one point, they had people there, didn't they, to sort of when they were very concerned about attacks directly hitting the nuclear power plant. But it's all very, very dangerous, and it's literally playing with fire. And all they're trying to do is scare the West into not responding by giving more weapons.
You mentioned there the fact that there are weapons, there is military aid practically on the border with Ukraine, but we saw a conversation between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin at the end of last week, which went wrong. And it was not long after that Russia launched its drones. In that sort of there was very much the sign that when things go wrong, Russia carries on doing what it wants to do. How much does Donald Trump's relationship with all this actually play into the way that this is all going at the moment? And we've just heard about Trump and Netanyahu meeting in Washington. So there is this real strong sense, isn't there, that what Donald Trump's doing is directly affecting what's going on in the ground.
I mean, there's all the speculation, isn't there, about who it was in the White House who stopped those weapons. There was a piece suggesting it was Pete Hegseth, a piece suggesting it was Colby. It has to be Donald Trump in the end, I think. Nothing's going to happen in the White House without him knowing truly. But he keeps changing his mind publicly. This is the problem for Ukraine. There's no consistency. At one minute he's, talking to Putin. The next minute, after he's talked to Zelensky, he's like, oh, maybe we will send them these missiles after all. They need these Patriots. They're very good. And it doesn't really help that there's no consistency and that you can't predict what he's going to say next. I mean, one can only hope that maybe the last thing he heard he then acts on, and maybe Zelensky managed to convince him that America doesn't need these few weapons that are sitting there at the border, and it doesn't cost the Pentagon much to send them over. And it costs a lot more in making America look weak if Putin then just laughs in his face and sends hundreds of missiles, practically as the text of the conversation is being read out on the news.
We have the Coalition of the Willing meeting this week, I believe. That is something which is subject to something happening in peacetime, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, nobody is going to send troops into Ukraine during a hot war with Russia. That's just not going to happen. But I think the Ukrainians, I mean, it must be very frustrating. I can't speak for them, obviously, but I know lots of people I know there. They're great. We're saying all the right things in the UK and in France and Germany and so on, but where is the practical help? And that, you can't just sit around, with kind words. That doesn't really help when you're sitting in a shelter at night.
And the involvement of the Chinese is something that's been covered over this weekend. It said that the Chinese foreign minister has told the European Union that Beijing won't accept Russia losing its war against Ukraine. It says that this could allow the US to turn its full attention to China. An absolutely extraordinary comment there, given the fact that China's saying, as long as Russia is winning, it keeps the heat off Beijing.
Exactly. And there's also, I've seen reports, I mean, who knows whether it's true or not, that if China was to make a move into Taiwan, it might instruct Russia to launch some sort of action against a NATO country to deflect attention away. And who knows, it's very difficult to predict exactly what is happening with that Chinese-Russia relationship. I know that I've seen other reports suggesting that there was Chinese technology involved in some of the drones and so on, and some of the new wave of weapons that are being seen and shot down. People can see inside. I mean, I think the West is sort of running to catch up with all of these things. And because Europe isn't as strong as it should be at the moment. That creates another opportunity for China to kind of assert its power.
What are you hearing from friends on the ground out in Ukraine in terms of how they are managing every day? I mean, you say you have friends who are constantly in contact with you. The fact that we are talking about the geopolitical efforts or absence of is one thing. But in terms of the fact that this is now been going on for, 3.5 years, what does that feel like now?
It's really exhausting. I mean, I have a lot of friends in different parts of the country. It is very different wherever you are. But in Kyiv now, it's becoming pretty relentless. I mean, I frequently travel there. I go to Odessa, I go to Kharkiv. And before, when you were going off to Odessa or Kharkiv, people would say, "Oh, be careful." But actually, Kyiv comes under, just as relentless an attack. And because it's a big city, I guess people have this kind of, if it's me, what can I do about it? But I'll just go to bed as usual and hope that nothing happens to my apartment block. But one of my friends in Odessa, the front of her house was completely smashed up in one of the attacks last week. All of the windows broken. The whole street looks absolutely apocalyptic. It looks absolutely terrible. She turns up at work the next morning. People have to carry on. They don't really have the choice to just sort of bemoan their fate and sit at home and just sort of like cry about it. They just got to crack on and rebuild, the windows that were broken. I've got a friend in the military who's a combat medic, and the situation there, he's in one of the very frontline units where he has to go and pick up the injured or the soldiers who've died. Often the drone activity is so heavy that they can't go and get people. People are sitting there injured for 2-3 days.
Felicity Spector, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. That's Felicity Spector, senior producer for Channel 4 News here in London and author of Bread and War, a Ukrainian story of food, bravery and hope. Still to come on today's programme.
For about a month now, the situation at the Polish-German border has changed significantly. The German authorities are actually refusing to let migrants into their country. This is very different to what has been happening in the past 10 years.
We'll ask why Poland is sending 5,000 troops to help police its borders with Germany and Lithuania. Stay with us.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS House View, you get the big picture in bite-sized articles, delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts, all focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals. UBS, banking is our craft.
7:21 a.m. here in London. We continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio, Nina Dos Santos, international broadcast correspondent and former CNN Europe editor. Good morning, Nina.
Good morning.
How's the Dos Santos world today, this week?
Fine, but it's pretty rainy here in London, isn't it? Sort of gloomy, and I suppose that's an important moment to reflect on years gone by, not far from this very postcode.
Indeed. I mean, we are expecting a heatwave for another 2 weeks, so it is a brief respite. But yes, there is a big moment in London today. It is 20 years since 7/7. Explain to us just a little bit about the context, because it was an enormous moment for London and for the United Kingdom when it was a major terrorist attack on the London transport infrastructure, and it pretty much changed everything, didn't it?
It did, yeah. This is at the height of the aftermath of the invasion of Iraq, the Second Gulf War, and the UK, remember, had taken a very controversial position, thanks to its Prime Minister at the time, Tony Blair, of deciding to throw its lot in with the Americans and launch this offensive on Iraq. And lots of people inside the UK didn't actually agree with that. Remember, there were a lot of people who took to the streets not far from where these bombings on the London Underground network took place to protest vociferously against Tony Blair's decision to throw his lot in with the then US President George W. Bush's campaign. And it was felt that as a result, the country was quite divided about that. Remember that the UK has a significant Muslim population who were irked by this, and tragically, a number of years afterwards, we saw 52 people killed, 770 people wounded, some of them extremely badly, having lost limbs, life-changing injuries as a result of attacks on the tube stations, the underground network, Edgware Road, not far from where we are here, Aldgate East in the City of London, and also a fatal blast that took place in Tavistock Square in the centre of London between sort of Tottenham Court Road, Russell Square area. For anybody who knows the British Museum, it happened around about there. And as a born and bred Londoner, this was deeply shocking to see. I mean, I have grown up in London throughout the years of the spectre of the IRA terrorism, when, you know, it was quite common on my way to school in the tube to get, evacuated through the tunnels because there might have been some bomb threat back in those days, but nobody had really seen anything this devastating. And the closest comparison that there was actually the 2001 9/11 attacks that took place in New York City that, of course, precipitated the decision to go into places like Afghanistan and Iraq.
Indeed, and it had this... It sort of set the tone, didn't it? And we can move on now to the UK-Iranian relationship now, that given the fact that we now, let's have a look at an article in the Telegraph about the fact that we are living in a world now where the threat of rogue operators was obviously demonstrated out in 7/7. It was demonstrated in 9/11. And if you have somewhere now like Iran where you have the state reassembling itself following the Israeli conflict and the US bombing, there is that fear that there will be supporters, allies of Iran, who will be, as we were happening in 9/11, as we were happening just before 7/7, planning to create some sort of rogue attack on a country, on the United Kingdom.
Well, just as the threat of Islamist and homegrown domestic terrorism became devastatingly apparent on 7/7 20 years ago. Now we're seeing, of course, frictions about the issue of Israel's war in Gaza and more broadly about sort of what's happening in the Middle East. And Iran as well is also a big threat for the UK in a very different way, because we've got this report in the Daily Telegraph that hints at something that many of us who've been watching this for some time have been waiting to happen. We're expecting imminently the publication of a secretive report compiled by one of the few classified committees in Parliament in the UK, the Security Committee, to come out with its 2-year-long probe into the activities of Iran in the UK, and most notably focusing on the activity of organisations like the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And what authorities in the UK have been very concerned about is that there's a large Iranian diaspora that are very active in the UK, some of whom have been targeted, they have been threatened, they have been harassed. One Iranian journalist working for Iran International was stabbed in the leg not that long ago and had to flee the UK. So we're expecting this report to lay out the complexities that the authorities are facing in terms of potentially kidnappings, death threats to Iranian dissidents, but also cyber activities targeting UK parliamentarians who are trying to protect their constituents of Iranian origin from these types of activities on UK soil, and it appears to be a growing threat. It's
an interesting article in the Telegraph from the political editor Ben Riley-Smith there, mentioning two things. Firstly, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has had to sign off this report.
But that's quite common with these security reports. Remember, Boris Johnson blocked the Russia one.
Indeed.
He didn't want to sign off on it.
No. And the level of sensitivity that we're talking about is obviously one of the reasons behind it. But the fact that Iran is now going to be placed in the same security risk bracket as China and Russia, that's that moment, isn't it? That's that step change, that difference.
I would argue that I think a lot of international observers would have put them in there anyway, actually, with, as I said before, Iranian diaspora members having been, seen threats to their lives. Remember, there was a Chechen-born man who was intercepted by UK authorities and charged and I think convicted, actually, on, reconnaissance activities when he'd arrived and was, they believed, preparing some kind of attack on that Iranian international television station that this journalist worked for, who was stabbed later on. So there are real concerns about the security of members of the Iranian diaspora community in the UK. Indeed, the head of MI5, Ken McCullum, just last year gave a big speech, which was in itself quite unusual for him, at the helm of the domestic security agencies, pinpointing the threat coming from Iran, saying that authorities had thwarted, since 2022, by then, and this was just last year, things might have ratcheted up since, we don't know, at least 20 plots that could have affected people's lives in the UK. And we've also seen similar sort of activities, allegations of similar activities in the United States and elsewhere by, the Iranian state targeting people outside of their borders.
Nina Dos Santos, international broadcast correspondent, former CNN Europe editor and regular guest around the Monocle table. Thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. Now here's a summary of what else we're keeping an eye on today. Donald Trump has ridiculed his former ally Elon Musk after Mr. Musk said he was founding a new rival political party called the America Party. The US president called him a train wreck. Israel has carried out a wave of air attacks on targets in Yemen. It follows an attack on a commercial vessel in the Red Sea, where the crew was forced to abandon ship about 100 kilometres south of the Yemeni port of Hodeidah. Officials in central Texas say a rescue operation following this weekend's flash floods has become a recovery mission. At least 70 people have been confirmed dead and several other people are still unaccounted for. Indirect talks between Israel and Hamas have ended without any breakthrough. The talks in the Qatari capital Doha were aimed at reaching a ceasefire agreement and securing the release of the remaining Israeli hostages. And an Australian woman who laced her family's lunch with poisonous mushrooms has been found guilty of murder and attempted murder. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, here's another story that we think you should slightly pay attention to, because Brazilian bakeries are a national institution. Here's Monocle Radio senior correspondent and indeed resident Brazilian Fernando Augusto Pacheco on why people should pay more attention to Brazilian bread and the latest stats proving that Brazilians are enjoying little trips to bakeries more than ever.
I'm happy to inform you that the Brazilian bakery is very much alive. Besides football, samba, and the other clichés from my country, one that I think is not talked about enough is the delight of our bakeries. Honestly, Brazil does bread and bakeries so well, and the world needs to know that. Brazilians' love affair with bakeries are stronger than ever. Thankfully, the dieting concerns are not as strong as the delights of our bread. According to Sebrae, an organization that supports micro and small businesses in the country, a new bakery opens in Brazil every 6 minutes. And 86% of all bakeries are owned by individual micro entrepreneurs. A perfect fit for entrepreneurial Brazil. Brazilian bakeries are a place to flirt, to meet friends. There is an intricate sense of conviviality, the chit-chat while you wait for your freshly sliced cold cuts. And yes, those are always better than the pre-packed ones. And if you want coffee, remember, never on the go. A tiny espresso goes quickly. And why not go for a fresh and icy passion fruit juice in the warmer days? And did I mention pão francês? There are many other regional names for it, but that's how I call it in São Paulo, which translates to French bread. It's incredibly delicious and very Brazilian, even though it was initially inspired by the baguette when the traveled elites returned to the country, wanting to replicate that flavor. And what came out of it in the end is a crusty small bread and very fluffy inside. It is divine indeed. There are many reasons for the expansion of bakeries. First, people like more than ever to eat and support local. But let's be honest, I think the irresistible flavor of pão francês remains the biggest reason for bakery success. Only last year, the bakery sector moved 153.3 billion reais in Brazil, which is 23.86 billion euros, an increase of 10.9% compared to the previous year. A quarter of all Brazilians go to a bakery daily. In São Paulo only, where there are over 5,000 bakeries, over 18 million pães franceses are sold every single day. That's higher than the population of the city, in fact. Every time I go back to São Paulo, one of my main pleasures is to buy a fresh batch of bread straight out of the oven. That simple mixture of flour, water, salt, and yeast drives me crazy. And of course, I eat one with no feelings, anything, just pure bread. It is that good. So next time you plan a trip to Brazil, don't forget to visit one of our culinary temples. Order a pão na chapa and have a sip of coffee or juice. You'll also be helping all of those micro-entrepreneurs, keeping our population well-fed and happy. For Monocle, I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
Thank you, Fernando. And that was our senior correspondent and resident Brazilian, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. If you enjoyed that, well, for more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, sign up for our free daily newsletter, the Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. From today, travellers crossing between Poland and Germany and Poland and Lithuania will see tighter border checks. The Polish Prime Minister says the move is in response to Germany sending migrants back in the direction of his country, and up to 5,000 soldiers are reportedly being sent to the border to offer support. Well, Mateusz Mazzini is writer-at-large at Gazeta Wyborcza and a lecturer in journalism at Collegium Civitas in Warsaw. Very good morning. Welcome back, Mateusz.
Morning, thanks for having me.
So what is this problem at the border?
So it's actually quite a difficult question to answer because for all intents and purposes, as far as we know, when we look at the data, there isn't much of a problem internationally when it comes to Germans supposedly sending back migrants. Of course, Poland is an external country of the European Union. It has an external border with Belarus, Ukraine, and most importantly, the Russian enclave in Kaliningrad. So it doesn't come across as a surprise that there will be migrants coming in who will be relocated back to Poland if they travel further into Europe, because we have the Dublin mechanism that still allows for that. So whenever there is a migrant who entered the European Union illegally and finds himself in Germany, Germans have the right to send him or her back to Poland. But as far as we know, these cases are very rare. According to available data, the total number of migrants sent back from Germany into Poland on the border between Germany and Poland totaled no more than 10,000 people in the entire year of 2024. This is much more a political issue because the far right in Poland is trying to politicize the topic of migration. There are vigilantes and kind of bottom-up social movements organized by far-right extra-parliamentarian politicians, so people from outside parliament, claiming that there is an invasion of the Polish territory. The Polish western cities are flooded with migrants and they need to take it into their own hands because the state is falling. Is failing to provide basic security for its own citizens. So I think Tusk, in order to curb the votes of the right and in response to the rising militias, if you please, is trying to make a move to show force and show presence of the state on the border.
So this is, what you're saying is that this is Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister, struggling to keep a grip on the far right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is actually becoming a major debate here in Poland within the domestic information space, because we don't really have a problem with migration, nowhere near as much as most of other European Union countries have external borders. This is absolutely incomparable to countries like Greece, for instance, that obviously has major issues with keeping illegal migrants outside of the country. But because of the fact that this became politicized, and it was very predictable that this was going to happen, we're, as a country, freshly out of the presidential campaign in which migration again became an issue. So it was to be expected that the far right would would pick it up and would form some sort of movement around that issue. And for reasons unknown to the wider public, myself included, the government didn't take that threat seriously. And right now we end up in a situation in which on 52 different border crossings along the border between Germany and Poland, we have reinstated border checks for the first time on such a scale since Poland joined the European Union in 2004, and then subsequently the Schengen zone in 2007, because we have several cases of civilian cars being driven from Germany into Poland and being stopped by vigilantes, being searched by vigilantes, with the Polish police and the Polish border guards not really being given any instructions on how to tackle that kind of situation, and state basically indeed failing to perform its own tasks and duties, but not with relation to migrants, but with relation to the far right.
Briefly, Mateusz, we have to sort of place this in the wider context. Firstly, in the relationship between Poland and Germany, and wonder just how strained things are becoming, but also the fact that the European Union has seen border checks increased around the Schengen area for quite some time now.
Well, that is indeed a fact, and Germans have had border controls on and off on the border with Poland for quite some time. So on the one hand, that shouldn't really come across as a surprise that Poland is reinstating controls. Denmark did it some time ago. The Netherlands did it some time ago. So as you're rightly pointing out, there is a number of different member states within the Schengen zone that are still reinstating controls because of the flow of illegal migrants that are undocumented, are moving from one Schengen country to another. And this is going to cause some tension between Friedrich Merz, the new Chancellor of Germany, and Donald Tusk, but not to the degree to which it would actually put a strain on the entire relation between Berlin and Warsaw. I think both Merz and Tusk are very, very aware of the fact that there is a threat to far right domestically rising in both countries. The AfD is the most popular political party in Germany, polling 26-27%. That's more than CDU-CSU, the party of Friedrich Merz. So he has his own share of problems. And we know that AfD is primarily an anti-migration party, just as the Polish far right is, or is becoming right now. To be more specific. And in the broader context, that actually puts a huge question mark when it comes to the future of the Schengen zone as such, because we've grown accustomed to the fact that one could travel freely from one member state to another without having to spend time in very painful lines on border crossings. And that might no longer be the case for most people living inside the European Union in the foreseeable future.
Mateusz Mazzini, writer-at-large at Gazeta Wyborcza and lecturer in journalism at Collegium Civitas in Warsaw. Thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. It's 15:41 in Tokyo, which is where we head now, and we turn to Japan, where elections in the upper house later this month could reshape the country's politics. The current Prime Minister's approval rating has slumped to 25%, and a new populist party has surged to second place, overtaking the main opposition. Well, I'm joined on the line from Tokyo by Jeffrey J. Hall, who's a lecturer at Japan's Kanda University of International Studies. Good afternoon, Jeffrey. Good to have you with us.
Good afternoon. It's great to be on.
Just a little bit of context, please, in terms of those of us who might not know so much about the way that Japan's political system works. The upper house, what is its role and why are these elections so important?
Well, Japan's upper house is similar to perhaps the United States Senate in that it is a upper house that has longer fixed terms for its members. And in order to pass legislation, it needs to go through both houses. And currently, the ruling party of Japan, the ruling coalition, has a majority in the upper house, but it only has a minority in the lower house and has to work with opposition parties to get bills passed. So if they were to lose their majority in the upper house, this would make things much, much more difficult for them. And it looks like that this probably will happen.
Indeed. I mean, what is the likelihood of this happening, and what's gone wrong for the current Prime Minister?
Well, the likelihood seems to be about 50-50 right now. A lot of polls are saying they are at risk of losing their majority. What's gone wrong is that the LDP, the ruling party of Japan, has had scandals after scandal for several years now. It hasn't dealt very well with punishing the people involved in these scandals. And then to top it off, there's been a great deal of inflation, with people really seeing the price of basic things going up, including rice, which has doubled in price. And so the LDP is just being blamed for bad leadership of the country in this critical time.
And we also have the rise of the populist parties, don't we?
Yes, these populist parties are hitting the LDP mainly from the right. There's several of them, but the issue of immigration has become a big topic in this election, surprisingly. Japan doesn't have a huge number of illegal migrants or anything like that, but the LDP has started saying 0 illegal foreigners in its advertising because it's trying to appeal to voters who might be turning towards these anti-immigration parties. And Japan has also been experiencing record tourism that the government encouraged, and this is really being called over-tourism in the media, with huge numbers of foreign people visiting Japan's major cities. Japan is now cheaper to them because of the lower value of the yen. And there's a lot of media reports about bad behavior by foreign tourists. And this has kind of contributed to the sense of xenophobia that is growing among the far right.
And there is also the very tricky relationship with America that needs to be dealt with, that there is no trade agreement, that at the moment the government and Donald Trump in the United States are not coming any closer together. How much is that affecting things and affecting the narrative that you've just described?
Well, in this case, it isn't really that much of a factor per se, because this is something that Donald Trump unilaterally put on Japan, basically attacked Japan for no reason. So people aren't blaming the government for this problem. But it also puts the government in a difficult position because they can't make a deal before the July 20th election. So they're going to miss the deadline that Trump put on them. Because making a deal before the deadline would probably have them conceding something big to America, and that would look very bad for them ahead of an election where they're already unpopular. So they want to seem like they're standing up strong for Japan, for its farmers, for its industries.
Jeffrey J. Hall, thank you for joining us on the line from Tokyo. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
There's a craft to every question, which is why at UBS, we query every aspect of the market, working with specialized experts and award-winning research teams, covering over 3,500 stocks in 50 countries, all delivered in a comprehensive library, answering what you want with what you need. UBS, banking is our craft.
We head now to the Mediterranean to hear the latest news from there, from the Athens-based journalist Emmanuel Papavasiliou. Very good morning to you, Emmanuel. What's happening where you are?
Good morning, Emma. It's very lovely to talk to you today. I wanted to talk to you today about the relationship between Chinese and U.S. ambassadors in Athens, and the weird diplomatic web that this been sprung. So Chinese Premier Li Qiang last week, he made a district stop in Rhodes. It was officially described as a private visit, but it actually fits into a broader pattern of deepening ties between Athens and Beijing. Just last month, a brand new direct flight route, for example, was launched between Athens and Chengdu via Istanbul. And the Chinese investment in Greece, especially around infrastructure, remains very, very strong. Let's not forget that Chinese company Costco still owns a significant part of the Piraeus port. Now, what's striking here is the contrast with the U.S. relationships. Washington still considers Greece a key defense partner in the region. They're still very important NATO partners. However, there is still no U.S. ambassador in Athens. That post has been vacant since February. So when the Trump administration appointed Kimberly Guilfoyle, a former Fox News host, oddly enough, and one-time Trump's lawyer, who doesn't have much experience in diplomatic relations as the official ambassador, back in February, some eyebrows were raised here in Athens. And it is not quite known why she hasn't been deployed yet. However, this week, we might see some movement. This Wednesday, she's expected to appear before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as part of the formal confirmation process. But for now, China appears to be filling this diplomatic vacuum with soft power, visit by officials, and an economic outreach.
It's an interesting thing that you talk about the diplomatic sort of movement of China, but it's an interesting thing that when you go down to the port of Piraeus in Athens, you have to realise that actually a Chinese shipping company has been the majority stakeholder in Piraeus for a very long time now. There is already a sense that China is very, very active in Greece.
It is very, very active. Yes, let's not forget the fact that Costco still owns a big part of it. And the striking part is that while the economic ties with China are increasing, and actually our Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis in May was asked by CNBC, how does he feel about this with this new Trump administration? And he was quite pragmatic about the whole thing. He was saying that we understand that there is a bit of a tension between the two, but we would like to remain partners with both. So at the moment, as Greeks, we're treading a fine balance between the two.
Let's move on to bad news or good news, depending if you like cruises. The Greeks have suddenly realised, or not suddenly realised, the Greeks are now going to implement a passenger fee for people taking cruises. I mean, just outline the problem for us that's brought us to this point.
I think it's great news. I believe it's great news for us Greeks, and I'll tell you why. So the thing is that from June to September, Greece will charge cruise passengers just a 20 euro fee when arriving at key destinations such as Santorini and Mykonos, and just 5 euros for other ports. It does sound small and insignificant. To be honest, if you have the money to go to Santorini and Mykonos, of course you have 20 euros to send. But this has been long overdue because last year, cruise visitors just contributed very little to the local economies. Imagine this, we had about 1.34 million arrivals in Santorini last year and 1.29 million arrivals in Mykonos last year from these cruise ships. And because of their nature, because they're like all-inclusive, people just disembark on the island, don't spend anything, just flood it. Make it hard for the tourists there or the locals who do contribute to the economy, and then they go back. So in effect, with this little fee, we will make sure that these high amount of people just give a little bit of something, and it will contribute to the local municipalities and could help ease some pressure from the overwhelmed infrastructures there.
Finally, let's talk about what happens if you've had a few too many glasses of Prosecco on a Saturday night. You're in Athens and you need to get home. The transport system suddenly become your best friend.
Yeah, so this is a good point because unlike, for example, London, Athens is a city that never sleeps. In fact, a lot of people just carry on, not just partying after midnight, but they live life. You know, they have a few drinks, maybe they walk the dog, and that's because the temperatures are cooler there. And the problem is that the roads are full of people who do actually go to party, and the fact that we just take our cars to go everywhere. So this weekend, there was a brand new trial, a 24-hour public trial for metros, trams, and selected bus routes that run non-stop throughout until Sunday. It's an effort to modernize the city's mobility network and tackle these specific issues like drunk driving and weekend traffic accidents. And the hope now is that this late night offering will encourage people to ditch their cars, and it could become a permanent feature. It remains to be seen. It's very early.
Thank you so much for that. Emmanuel Papavasiliou joining us on the line from Athens. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. finally, on today's programme, when the elegantly curved, unmistakable and now world-famous Art Nouveau metro signs were first installed in Paris in the early 1900s, they created a scandal. Their green paint was considered un-French. Their ornate signs were condemned as being too difficult for children to read. Foreigners, said critics, would be stupefied. Well, thankfully, we're all stupefied in an altogether positive way, and now a museum has opened dedicated to the sign's designer. And to tell us more, I'm joined now by Alexandre Kouchner, who's the journalist and political analyst based in Paris. Good morning, Alice. How's Paris looking today?
Good morning. It's looking grey and rather cold, which is a fantastic news after the scorching heat of last week's.
Excellent. We're glad to hear that Paris is back to normal, albeit temporarily. So we're talking about a designer called Hector Guimard, who not many people had heard about.
No, including the French. He is, as you said, he's a designer responsible for some of our most iconic metro or subway entrances and some buildings around Paris. But he's a rather unknown figure because French people were never so big on Art Nouveau, and he's getting a museum that he probably deserved for a while.
So tell us a little bit more about him then, because obviously we see, or you see, everyone sees his designs are ubiquitous in central Paris. But who was he?
Well, he was a designer. He was rather active in the early 19th century, and he is, as you rightfully said, one of the spearhead of this Art Nouveau movement that sort of engulfed Paris. But his design were not very welcomed by the French. We're not so big on new things. So this sort of Belle Epoque movement was rather frowned upon, and his life work was not really recognized until very recently. He actually moved to the United States with his wife during the Second World War, where he pretty much spent the rest of his life and died there. And some of his supporters had to work quite hard for him to be recognized and finally get a museum.
So tell us about this museum. It's actually taking place in one of the buildings that he designed in Paris, isn't it?
Yes, it will be in Hôtel Mezzara. It's a 4-story building, quite iconic of the 16th arrondissement. He designed him himself for one of his very good friend, the Mezzara Count, who was an Italian native, but who, thanks to his fortune, decided to have a very nice pied-à-terre in Paris. It will endure a 2-year renovation program, and it will feature most of Hector Guimard's remaining artwork to be seen. He designed some furniture. There are some of his sketches that you could still see, because throughout the time, since his designs weren't that recognized, most of what he created in Paris, and especially these subway entrances that are so iconic with sort of this fans of iron and glass that were called the dragonflies, most of them were removed. There's only 88 left in Paris. So if you're really keen to see Hector Guimard's work and design, you'll have to go to that museum.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it, that only half of the metro station signs that you just described still remain. But what has happened to Parisians in the interim? Have they fallen in love with their metro station signs?
I wouldn't say they've fallen in love. You know, there's something quite interesting about the art that you see and pass by every day that you don't really get to enjoy anymore. First of all, as I said, most of his designs were removed, and now they are very iconic, but in a very Amélie Poulain way, if you wish. They are iconic. Some people stop by and some people take pictures. But for many Parisians, what you really care about is getting onto your subway.
And this is an interesting point, isn't it? That the external perception of Paris, the Eiffel Tower and the Guimard signs are of a romanticism that, dare I say it, having spent a little bit of a time there, Parisians struggle to come to terms with.
Well, let's just say again, the beauty of your daily life is sometimes overshadowed by the stress of the daily life. But what's very true is that Hervé Guimard did contribute to this very strong Paris visual identity that made it iconic and made it the first destination in the world for tourists everywhere. He's getting a museum because he is less known than, let's say, the Baron Haussmann, who is responsible for remodeling Paris in the 1850s. So everything you see around Paris is very strongly linked to that period and to that era. The fact that he's getting a museum is good news for his supporters, but let's be frank, there are over 130 museums in Paris. I'm not so sure that many Parisians have even heard of this new museum coming up.
Well, I think our interviewers might be changing that. Alexandre Kouchnard, based in Paris, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. And that's all the time we have for today's show. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Anita Riotta, Tom Webb and Monica Lillis. Our researcher was Henry King and our studio manager was Steph Chungu, with editing assistance from Jack Dewars. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you for listening and have a great week.